No matter what size garden you're working with, composting should be a part of your overall plan. This is the Urban Sentinel. Let's get into it. When I first started gardening, specifically when I made my first big large garden in my yard, I had made a pallet compost bin. Basically, exactly what it sounds like. A couple of pallets, screwed and wired them all together and started filling them with lawn clippings, debris, and things like that. And it worked out fairly well, but there were some drawbacks that it had. There were some hiccups here and there that I had with composting, and so I decided to switch it up the next time I rearranged the garden. Now, one of the primary issues I had in the whole composting issue with the pallet was it just was not retaining heat. It was basically the grass clippings and everything else would just sit there. It didn't matter what the weather was. It was a slow process. So I needed some way to kind of speed things up. That's when I thought of using a garbage can. Now, this is a black 45-gallon garbage can with a lid attached, hinged here at the back. It actually has wheels down at the bottom, but I have it in a position where if I needed to, for whatever reason, I can just move these cinder blocks out the way and then wheel it out. But the primary purpose is with the black absorbing heat, helping retain heat. And then what I did was I drilled very small vent holes, 3 down the front, 3 down on each side to allow aeration to come through. Now on the inside, I'll lift the lid up for you. You can see basically down in here, this added greens is literally table scraps that I just put in today, just not that long ago. And I did a little quick hand tilling, turned it up. As you can see, I've got plenty of worms in here, plenty of life growing on, and overall things like these little scraps from the squash, even this little lime here, all this within a 2-week period is going to be broken down substantially. Now I usually come out and turn it once per week. Now the question you might be thinking is, I can't get all the way down to the bottom, which is true, but the way my compost bin is set up, the stuff that's effectively at the bottom was the most broken down materials at the very end of the old compost pallet bin setup. So I dumped that in first, and then everything that was in the middle going up towards the top was the more recently used stuff. Now as this breaks down, it gets to be a lot looser. Since I use container gardening versus a wide open just in-ground, instead of wide open in-ground or even raised beds, I've been using the pots and the buckets for all of my crops. So one, it takes up less space, and 2, it requires a little bit less from the actual compost. So I can better utilize several small shovelfuls in multiple pots, because the primary thing when you're doing container gardening or any type of gardening is your nutrient-rich soil that's towards the surface. As it rains, that water, it grabs stuff, it pulls it down, it soaks further down inwards. So effectively, the nutrients go from the surface level down to the lower levels and passes through. Now, when you're planting directly in ground, at a certain point, any nutrients that are left that aren't taken up by the roots in the root system are going to be passed underneath them, and the plant can't get to them. The advantage with container gardening is, at the minimum, everything is self-contained. So your roots, to one extent, are at the bottom of the actual container. So even as nutrient-rich soil that's on the surface starts to trickle down through watering and rainfall, it still stays within the confines of the actual pot. Now, of course, you want to make sure your soil is still good. You just can't simply rely on putting soil in and calling it a day. But you have a better chance with small amounts of this compost, putting it on the top, packing it in, keeping it sort of level towards the top to keep a constant level of nutrient environment coming into the roots as the plants start to grow. Now this tube is a PVC tube. It goes all the way down to the bottom of the actual barrel. Inside there's a small half cinder block, just one of these sections sitting in there, and I pack some dirt around and I put this down in. But the PVC pipe has holes drilled all the way through. You can kind of see one off to the side there. That allows air circulation in between. Every now and then it would start to get packed up with some of the scraps as they start to reroot and start to grow. So I just have a copper tube that I use to kind of clear the area, but it lets air circulate inside the center area as well as catching the air from the outside, providing a little more beneficial balance to it. Now, I know with composting, you're supposed to have a certain ratio of effectively greens and browns. So greens, as an example, lawn clippings, browns, dry leaves, that sort of thing, to build it up. I really don't go by any formula. When I do cut my grass and, fall time comes and raking up, I'll throw whatever I have, just throw it in there. Again, scrap food, stuff from the kitchen, I just throw it in there. I'll give it a turn or two. If I had just recently cut my lawn, I probably would have thrown the table scraps in, left them, and then put the lawn clippings on top, and that would have been a done deal for the week and, not thought about it. But as I said before, I turn it at least once a week just to make sure things are moving around, getting, the extra circulation going. But I really think that it's a low maintenance thing to do. Now, obviously, if you don't have space for a 45-gallon garbage can, you can scale down. Now, granted, when you go very small, you have to be very particular about what you put in there and how much of it, because there's very little workspace at that point in time. But if you've got a patio, a small deck, maybe something that's a 5 by 10, you don't have a lot of space, a 5-gallon bucket could actually be used, because again, you're doing a smaller scale. Hopefully enough over a period of weeks to months will develop that you can use that for the next year. Pretty much everything that's going in there now is more or less going to sit through the winter time as we add a little bit more and a little bit more, and then springtime comes when I start getting ready to do more planting. That's when I mix it in with the soil that's here, turning it around, getting it all in there, so this way I've got a good stable base. So then when I start some seedlings inside the greenhouse, or I do any other plantings into the containers, they're going to have all fresh soil ready to go, and hopefully again have another good year. Now, for those of you new to composting but you understand the basics of food decomposing, as far as that goes, one, having a lid that closes helps mitigate a lot of the smell, because it keeps it inside till you open it up, and even then the smell doesn't linger on for hours and hours and hours. Flies are at a minimum too, because again, it's closed up. The soil, yes, they can get in through the holes if they're really ambitious, but it keeps flies out unless I leave it open for a period of time. And even then, for the food scraps that are here, 1 or 2 flies aren't going to really cause that big of an uproar. I don't have a problem with rats and mice, because the plastic, they're not getting in through it. And realistically, they're only smelling soil from their perspective, because that's really what's down towards the bottom end that they can get to. And again, the lid's closed, they're not coming up to the top. I've been lucky enough that the other wildlife, such as raccoons, aren't interested in it, and nothing else has come over. So you really don't have to worry too much. And as far as the worms that are in here, that's all beneficial. There's other little critters crawling around inside just as well, and all these add into the quality of the compost, because that's essentially what you want to have. You want to have life inside here. Helps keep everything going, helps keep everything working. Microbes that you can't see, worms and other crawlers that you can see, all add into it, the whole circle of life thing. Now, having a compost bin doesn't specifically mean that you're going to have the absolute most fantastic garden that you will ever see in the world. It just is an extra thing that you can use, one, as a skill set, getting used to it, practicing it, knowing what you can really do with that soil, and see the difference between, let's say, just out of the bag, out of the box garden soil, and then your own organic blend. You can add it as a supplement to sort of level things off, build things up. You don't necessarily need it. If you're throwing out your scraps and you're not leaving anything around, perhaps you don't want to take that chance. Your environment may not warrant you keeping table scraps, vegetables, fruits, that sort of thing lingering around. That it's safer to have them in a plastic bag and throw out, then that's what you got to do. It's mostly for when you're working and trying to manage your soil. Now, the actual ground for my area is quite clay-like. It soaks up water and pinches everything off, and it's very difficult without hours and hours of deep tilling over and over again to get it to stay loose. Even mixing in things like soil to help loosen it up, it's just unforgiving, or sand rather, in the soil, mixing it up, it's just unforgiving in general. So I found that for me personally, container gardening has been working out better. Now, I still have to deal with all the other issues of plants above surface when it comes to the pests and the mice and the mold and the fungus that I've been dealing with. That's a whole separate thing altogether. But adding in the compost has definitely helped the growth of the plants that have been coming through. It's helped them overall across the board in direct comparison to other plants that I've grown without any compost or without the right mix of compost in it. So overall, I think I paid maybe $11 for this at the most. And the PVC pipe, I will say that was free because that was actually in my garage several years ago. I don't even remember what it was for. I just cut off a section, put it in. And the cinder block piece, I had that from actually buying these at the hardware store to put together a different project that did not work out. But if you're going to do a compost bin, you want to have a little bit level of extra security on it and improve the performance. Try a garbage bag or a garbage can with a lid on it. And this way you can stack everything inside, get it mixed up, till it around, do a lot of the stuff by hand, or even a small garden trowel, because again, once you start packing stuff in and it starts decomposing, it's going to start compressing down, moving down. You're going to add more stuff in, but you're going to find that as you dig in deeper, you're getting more soil, more nutrient-rich bodies coming up versus just the original scraps and debris that you put in. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll catch you guys in the next one. I actually forgot about this. I want to show you this. It is my compost tea. It's actually just banana peels sitting in water in the greenhouse, which right now says it's a little over 110 degrees, more or less. But this adds extra potassium and some other minerals into the soil. I just pour a little bit in for some of the plants that I have, and it's been doing pretty well. And honestly, it's a simple thing to do. You know, fill it halfway up with water, start adding in your banana peels. Once your peels are higher than the water level, add a little bit more so you reach the point where almost the entire thing is filled. I just pour the liquid out a little bit at a time as I need it, you know, a couple ounces here and there, and I keep the peels inside and just keep adding more water. So far, it's been working out. Now at this point, that's all I got for you. Like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.